All right, so let's dive in. So who is this webinar for? I appreciate everyone being here. This webinar is for you if you fall into any of these categories. So if you feel like Bill Murray in the movie Groundhog Day, and every year kind of feels like the same, and you're not making huge positive shifts in the right direction, then this webinar is definitely for you. If you're dominating in some areas of your life, but others you kind of suffer. So, maybe you've got a bunch of money, but your relationships are really suffering. Or maybe you have strong relationships, but physically, your body's kind of falling apart because you haven't taken care of yourself. So this is definitely for you if you fall in that category. And if you're ready to commit to doing whatever it takes to finally get the life that you want. Jen, rookie, thanks. I appreciate that. So just to check in real quick before we jump in, I've done a version of this webinar for the last 5 years, and it's evolved a lot. I bring in new information every year as I grow and as I discover new things, and so I like to think that every year it gets better. But I'd love to hear in the chat if anyone was on last year. Because it was actually, I was looking back and it was the exact same time and date. It actually started at 4:30 instead of 4. But I didn't set that up, but it just turns out to be that time. So if you're on this last year, yeah, Carol Kemp, you were on last year. That's awesome. On the first, but missed the last year. Got it. So if you were here, pull out your framework, because we're going to go through that framework, and it's always great to celebrate. I heard somebody say, the key that you want to do at the end of the year is to peek at the past, to learn from what your goals were last year and to improve upon where you were, and then focus on the future. So every year that I do this, I find that it gets better and better each year because I get better at it. And I add more detail to it every year, and it becomes more and more effective. I promise you, if you commit to doing what I'm about to share, you will see your goals come to fruition. And I'll meet you here again next year, and we can celebrate your wins. But it doesn't just happen. You have to actually commit to taking the steps. So a few notes before we dive in. Stephen Pressfield, he wrote The War of Art. It's an awesome book if you haven't read it. He talks about this idea of the muse. So every time you sit down to do meaningful work, there's that thing in the back of your head that wants you to get up and go get a glass of water or check your email or check your Facebook feed. Fight that. He calls that the muse, and it always is trying to prevent you from doing something meaningful. So this is meaningful work. So I ask you just to be here. So throw your phone across the room. Unless you're watching this on your phone, then throw your computer across the room. Whatever you need to do, but try to just be present and do this work today. This will be super value packed. So it's not like a lot of other webinars where it's a lot of fluff stuff and it's a big sales pitch. There's a ton of really valuable information here. So I'm going to share at the end how to work with me on a personal basis. But I only work with very few people who have a very specific goal. And a lot of people aren't going to fall into that category. And that's totally fine. This information is going to apply to you, whether you fall into that category or not. And I think you're going to find it extremely valuable. And I want you to commit right now. If you're not going to commit to doing the action steps, then there's no point to even being on here, because you're really not going to gain much of anything just from listening. You actually have to do the work. So there's going to be 2 different exercises that we do throughout this. And we're not going to actually do them on here, but I'm going to describe how to do them. And we're going to set up a time and a space for you to do them later. And that's where the magic's going to happen. So commit right now that you will do those things. And just a side note too, I'm going to reference quite a few excellent resources. That is all the places I've pulled this information from. Believe it or not, I didn't come up with this information. Most of it's all taken from other really, really smart people. And so as I mentioned those, I will actually send you at the end of this a list of all those resources. Some of them are books, some of them are interviews, some of them are podcasts that I think are super, super valuable that would be good as follow-up education. So you don't have to take notes of all of them, because I'll send you a resource list afterwards. So why do I believe that this is the most important work that you will do? It's kind of seems strange because you're not actually out getting a property under contract, or you're not making a sale in your business, or you're not at the gym actually burning calories. Maybe you are, maybe you're watching this at the gym, which is great. But you're not actually doing the tactical stuff that you're going to discuss doing. But the way that I look at it is, this is the biggest domino up front that needs to fall to make all the rest of the dominoes fall in the right way throughout the rest of the year. If you don't do this, then all the rest of the stuff that you want, all the positive things that you want to happen in your life throughout the year, throughout 2022, can't happen, because you've got to be intentional about it. So to best illustrate this, I want to share a little bit about how this has played out in my own life. So I think many people who are on here, I see a lot of names that I recognize, and I think a lot of people know my story, but I'm just going to recap a little bit. So it was the beginning of 2016 that I really sat down and went through this version of the process, really for the first time in this way. And that's when things really, really shifted in my life. It's when I got really intentional about using this format. And up until that point, I had been doing a lot of flipping. So these are some of the flips that we did. And I flipped with my partners, and my dad has worked with me since the beginning of getting into real estate, and a lot of friends and staff members. And, we did about 70 flips from 2011 to 2016. So we had created a pretty decent sized business. We built, it was a cool business. And by all outside accounts, we're doing very well. We looked to be very successful, and depending on your definition of success, we were very successful. We had a team, we had an office, we built a name as an authority. We were doing lots of deals, but there was just kind of one problem. And it was when I looked at how much closer I was to financial freedom in 2016, I realized I was 0% closer to financial freedom. And that was like the whole reason I got into real estate. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad back, man, it's like 15 years ago now. And that inspired me to get into real estate, to get this elusive financial freedom. And I'd done 5 years of flipping, over 70 flips, and I was no closer to financial freedom because we hadn't purchased any assets. I hadn't held on to any assets that were paying us indefinitely. So it was in 2016 that my wife and I went on our honeymoon. We had just gotten married at the end of 2015, went down to Mexico, and my wife and I sat down for the very first time and went through this process. We went through it together. And I really went from feeling stuck, kind of like, this heavy burden of creating this hamster wheel that I was on, that I knew wasn't getting me any closer to my true goal of financial freedom, to all of a sudden feeling like I was engineering my own life. And I think that's what this process can do. So a couple examples, when we discussed this in 2016, we talked about me leaving flipping and creating passive income. And I hadn't heard about HUD-VASH, which was the program that I started working with to house homeless veterans. We would purchase and rehab houses and rent them to homeless vets. I didn't even know that existed at the time, but I just set that as one of my goals. And I decided that, I was going to do one new rental property per month. And it wasn't going to be right away, but I set that as a goal halfway through the year. I was going to start doing one new rental property a month. And we also planned to have our first child that year. And so when we got back, all of a sudden things started to fall in place because we got super intentional about it. Those were just two examples. There was several other goals that we set. And I started buying long-term buy and hold properties. These are some of the ones that I started buying with the new business that I formed. And I also at the same time took on a role as the CFO of a nonprofit that I was passionate about. And I never could have taken on that role had I still been flipping, but that opportunity came along and it really aligned because it was a nonprofit that helps veterans. And that's what my real estate business did. So I could build my real estate business while I took on this new role that I was really passionate about. So just before this, so then fast forward then, that was 2016 when we first sat down to do it for the first time. And then just before the dumpster fire year of 2020, almost exactly 2 years ago now, my daughter was born. So our second child was born. So we ended up having that first child that year, 2016, or actually 2017 is when Taryn delivered. And then in 2020, we had our second child. And so at this point, I went one step further. And so I mentioned there's going to be two parts to this process today. And so when I started implementing this second part, now all of a sudden things really started shifting for me. And that was to visualize and get clarity on what my ideal life would look like 10 years into the future. And Taryn and I had a lot of discussions about this. And that's when things started shifting. That's when I realized that I wanted to transition into vacation homes. And I got specific. We had, I think it was one vacation home at the time. And we decided, you know what, we want to scale this. And we got specific about where we wanted to scale it. And I decided I want to have 30 vacation rentals in this specific area and the type of returns I wanted and the price points. We personally decided that we wanted more space to expand the vacation rental business and for our kids and to start growing our own food and some, seeing what it was like to live more in the country. And then I wanted a thriving community of other real estate investors to create something like that. And so that was one of the things that I visualized 10 years down the road having. And so I had to think back then, or backwards plan to what are the next steps to start doing that. So over the last 2 years then, based on that vision of where we want to be 10 years down the road, we started putting those components in place. And now we have 10 vacation rentals in the area that we visualized having these properties. So we're well on our way to 30 vacation rentals. And, they meet the very specific standards or, the parameters that we set up, like location, price point, cash flow, all those things, because we were intentional about it. We also sold our house and we bought a farm. So this was about a year and a half ago. We bought a farm and we rehabbed the house. And this past summer, planted food for the first time. I've never planted seeds in the ground before, but we started to implement some of the stuff that we've dreamed about. We got 20 chickens, so now we have eggs every day. I just ate eggs 2 hours ago for lunch from our chickens, and so we started to put these components in place. And then I had to ask myself if I want to have a thriving community of other rental property investors who support each other and people that I can help to grow their businesses and get some of the same results that I'm experiencing. What does somebody like that do? And so I decided right after I set this as my vision that I was going to start a podcast. I knew nothing about podcasting. There was no permission granted by anyone. I had no audience. So I think the first person that, for the first episode, the only people that listened to it, I think, were my wife and my mom. So I appreciate Mark Dennis for being my guinea pig coming on, but this is the very first episode. This was 2 years ago. And now there's 100 episodes and the community has grown substantially since then, just because I committed, like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to figure it out. So, and it's all based on this vision. So I don't want to mislead anyone into thinking that everything is just perfect and that it all just falls into place and that, I'm a guru that's got this all figured out, because that's not the way it is. It's still like, this is a picture my wife took just a couple of weeks ago. This morning, as I was prepping for this webinar, my kids were in here showing me their Christmas presents and playing with them while I'm trying to, do work. And it's still messy. There's still chaos, but we've got a vision of where we're heading, and it's a guide for us. It's a process that we can follow to become intentional. And so that's what I'm going to share today, because I love this philosophy that a great life is made up of great days. And when you follow this process, it's going to give you more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't want. Basically, that's what it does for you. So here's a framework for what we're going to talk about today. Really, it boils down to, how do you make the best decisions? I mean, we really could have just named the webinar that. And there's 3 concepts. So I talked about, there's action steps. There's 2 main action steps that you're going to need to take that we're not going to do here. We're not going to have the space for, but we're going to set the space for later. And then there's some supporting concepts that I think are really important to understand, are going to support you as you're doing that. So the first one is the foundation of every decision. Like, how do you make a decision, a good decision? because it's so, so important. And there's actually a formula for great decisions. Why one yes is equal to 1,000 no's. And decisions are also not binary. It's not always a yes and no. And then how to trade in good for great, and what that looks like. So let's dive in. So first, the first concept is the foundation for every decision. So several years back, I was a part of a Vistage group. So I was in this group with 10 other about 10 other business owners who own different types of businesses. It was a great group. We met monthly, and we were able to sit down one month. Somebody knew Jim Dethmer, who wrote this book, 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. If you haven't read this book, it's another great book. And he's just a brilliant guy who really studies success deeply, and not just like surface level, like what I accomplished success, but how to live a meaningful life. And so he asked, when he walked in, he asked this question to the group. We had a half day with him, and we talked about a lot of things, but I remember him asking this question. This is the first thing he said when he walked in. He said, "What's your number?" And so think about that. He said, "You guys are all business owners." He said, "If you tell me you don't have a number, you're lying to me. I know you've got a number in the back of your head." And he said, it's that number where you think everything's going to fall into place. You know, if I can just get to $1 million of revenue in my business, man, I'm set. I'm good. I'm going to be happy at that point. Or if I can get X number of subscribers, or if I can make $12,000 in passive income, I'm good. I'm going to be happy for the rest of my life. And he said, "I'm going to burst your bubble. I've been down those roads." And he said, "I've been multimillionaire." And he said, "You're happy for about 2 seconds after you get it, maybe 2 minutes, maybe 2 days." But he said, real quickly, you're on to the next thing. And that's how we're wired. And so he said, you got to get rid of that preconceived notion of that number in the back of your head. And it makes you think about, if you compare two people, like if there's a guy who has huge goals, kind of like, the Elon Musks of the world, who have these huge goals that are, earth changing, but they sacrifice everything to achieve those goals, the terrible relationships, terrible health, all the other metrics, just to achieve this goal that they might achieve, sometime at the end of their life. Is that success? Or if you compare that to somebody who might have not quite as lofty of a goal, but they've got great relationships, and they've got, their health is they take care of themselves mentally, physically, spiritually. And that's the way they operate their days. And maybe they hit that goal, or maybe they come up a little bit short. Who's more successful? And I think we can kind of lose sight of what success is based on the narrative that we hear all the time. Arthur Brooks is a Harvard professor, and he studies happiness. He's written several books on happiness. He's a really smart dude. And I just heard an interview that he did, and he told the interviewer, he said, people believe that their satisfaction is a result of what they have, and they forget that true satisfaction is a function of what they have divided by what they want. So if we go back to grade school math and we analyze this function that Arthur is referring to here. So this is what it looks like. This is what he's describing here. So if we look at the denominator, the bottom number here, it's a focus on what we want. So we know by looking at this function here that if we increase our focus on what we want, then our satisfaction is going to drop. That number, that percentage of our satisfaction is going to drop. And so you might look at that and say, well, then I guess the goal is to set the bar super low and just be content with what you have. And, some people might believe that, but I think that I disagree with that. And I think that's a race to the bottom. And I don't think anytime it's a race to the bottom, I don't think that's the right solution. What I see is the opposite. And I think Arthur went on to support this, is that you can set very high goals, but your focus on what you have has to correlate to that. So I think as people continue to focus on what they want, they lose sight of what they have. And so they have to grow in proportion for your satisfaction level to stay the same, or you continue to grow more appreciation around what you have than what you want. So he also said in that same interview that gratitude is the strongest weapon that we have to increase our happiness level. That's a good gratitude practice. That's the strongest thing, the best thing that we can do. They've done tests, and that improves our happiness level higher than anything else that they've tested. It's interesting. So you got to ask yourself, what are you optimizing your life for? So by definition, you cannot optimize for everything, truly optimize. Optimizing means that you're making the best use for. So what are you making the best use for your life for? So if you're solely optimizing for money, then you won't be a very good parent. You can't be, right? Because I promise you, I know from firsthand experience that kids do not lead to more money. They don't lead to making a whole bunch more money. So is that to say that you should never have kids? Not at all. Kids are awesome. They're amazing. But you have to be intentional about what you're optimizing for. Because what we optimize for leads us to the decisions that we make as we're operating, as we're living our life. We're making decisions. We're thinking about, okay, what is it that we're optimizing for? And so you got to be intentional about that. Because where you sit right now is the culmination of every decision that you have made up to this point in your life. I mean, that's a sobering thought, right? I mean, if you optimize for the wrong thing or too much in one area or not at all, then you probably aren't going to end up in the place that you want to have your ideal life, right? And we are a culmination of all the decisions that we've made up to this point. So this leads to the question of how do we make the best decisions and know that we're making the best decisions when we do it. So in order to do this, I want you to take a minute here. Sorry. Take a minute and think about a decision that you've struggled with recently. It could be around your career. Maybe should I take a new job, or which job should I take? If you got options, or should I leave my current job? Or maybe it's, around a relationship. Should I break up with my boyfriend or girlfriend? Or should we have another child? Or maybe it's an investing decision. Should I buy this house or invest in some other type of asset? There's a lot of decisions around investments. And I think a lot of people on here are investors. So I want you to get that decision in your mind as sort of a framework to think about this next concept. Because I think when most people are confronted with a decision, they'll sit there, they'll stew on it. They might create the old pros and cons list. But how do you really make that decision, these life-changing decisions, and know that you aren't making a mistake? I had the experience of seeing the agony of difficult decisions play out when I was at the academy. I always thought West Point was sort of a microcosm of society at large. It was sort of like this pressurized environment where there's really high highs and really low lows, and there was big decisions to be made. And one of those that stands out in my mind was back around junior year. So when you're a cadet at West Point, you get to go for free. The whole 4 years is all paid for, and you pay it back with 5 years of service. So the first 2 years that you're there, you can leave at any time, and you have no commitment whatsoever. You could literally stay there, get 2 years of free top education, and walk out the door. And so as you're going through these years, especially your plebe year, your freshman year, which is designed to apply as much pressure to you as possible, it's very difficult knowing that. You've got that open door right there, and I can walk out at any time. There's nothing that's keeping me here other than me making the decision to stay. And so the way it works is the day you step foot in your first class, your junior year, you're committed. You're committed to the next 2 years of school at West Point, and you're committed to 5 more years in the Army after that. So you're literally, with one step, you're signing up for 7 years. And so I saw people stand outside. I mean, everybody stands outside and questions what they're doing, but I saw people sobbing outside the door of their classroom their junior year because they didn't know, am I making the right decision here? And it was really tough for them to decide, should I step in to do it? And this was back 2003. So this was right as the war is really picking up. And we knew, that once we graduated in 2 years, there's a lot of people who are, in our class who are going to be in some dangerous situations. And so it made it even a tougher decision. But, as I look back on that, if I had known what I know now about this planning practice, it would have made the decision much, much easier for me, because I would have thought through, where do I want to be in 10 years? This was something that I didn't do at the time. I didn't it was a passing thought. Obviously, we all kind of think about the future here and there, but I hadn't pictured it and got clear in my head around what my ideal life will look like 10 years down the road. And if I had done that, it would make that decision so much easier. Does it align with that vision or not? So in thinking about a decision you've struggled with, understand that whatever it is, anytime you're making a big boy or big girl decision, there's going to be immediate pain or immediate pleasure associated with that decision. But in my mind, that's a distraction. I think that the immediate, it could be good or bad, a lot of times we make a decision that's going to benefit us short term, but then you got to pay for it long term. So whatever it is, short term, I think is a distraction. Really what you should think about is, where is my life heading long term, and make your decision based on that. So in my opinion, the foundation of every decision rests on your future ideal life. That's the foundation of every decision. And that will guide you on your daily decision making. So we're about to talk through an exercise. And let me pull this up actually. So what we're going to do, we're not going to actually fill this out, because last year I tried to give like 5 minutes to people to fill this out, and it takes longer than 5 minutes. It's just not enough time. So at the end, we're going to create the space to fill this out. But this is the first exercise, and this is one of the most important things you're going to do. I want you to recognize right now too, that this is not planning. This is visualizing. So just make a decision around where you want your life to be. Picture it in your head. Make it as clear as possible. You can come back and reference what I'm, some of the questions I'm about to share here. But understand, this is going to evolve, and there's no right or wrong answer. And you don't have to understand the how of any of this. Okay. You're free to make the decision here and decide what you want your life to look like 10 years from now. So here's some questions that I think are super helpful to come back to and reference later on as you're filling this out and as you create the space for this. So where do you want to live? Who will your partner be? Describe that person in detail. You might not know them yet, but you can describe them. You can visualize that person. What type of traits do they have? What type of characteristics? What do they believe? What are their values? Will you have kids? What are their ages going to be? So I know it seems weird if you're like single right now and you're like, well, how can I predict kids? I don't know. Like, decide. Say, I want to get married in the next 4 years. Then 2 years after that, I want to have my first kid. And then a few years after that, I'm going to have my next. So 10 years from now, I'm going to have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I'm going to be married to this specific person. What is your body going to look like? A lot can happen in 10 years. I think it's Tony Robbins who said that we underestimate what we can do, we overestimate what we can do in a year, and we vastly underestimate what we can do in 10 years. And I think it's so true, because you can go from morbidly obese to a marathon runner in a 10-year period easily. So just make a decision. So you can go through all these decisions, and I've got a bunch that apply to you personally and then your business, because I know there's a lot of business owners and investors who are on this webinar as well. So definitely come back and reference this later, and we'll set up a time to do this. But I do this in OneNote. So Microsoft OneNote is a app that you can download on your phone and on your computer, and it will sync. And it's just an easy way to create almost like a journal. So I can go back. I think I started in 2015. So I have a year for a book in Microsoft OneNote for every year, and it's labeled by year. And then I've got a section for my goals. I've got a section for quotes that I hear. I've got a section for ideas that I have. I got a section just for general notes, and I'll label them by dates. And so I can go back and reference. So I can go back to 2015 and see what my goals were back then. So I recommend doing this in a something like that. You could do it in a journal, a written journal. I just know my phone's always with me. So if I'm listening to a podcast and get an idea, I can write it down in my phone. But you could also do it in a Word doc if you want. And don't feel like it needs to be 10 pages. Do a few paragraphs. It's going to evolve. You'll add to it over time. This is Viktor Frankl, and he kind of references that exercise that we just talked about a little bit, not in the exact same way, but he wrote this book, Man's Search for Meaning. I read it like 7 years ago, and it's like one of the best books I've ever read. It's if you've ever felt sorry about your situation or sorry for yourself and about what you're going through, read this book, and it will turn you around real quick. So he's somebody who was in the Nazi concentration camps. He was in there for 3 years, and he went to 4 different concentration camps, watched his whole family be murdered around him. His wife, who he just married 9 months previous, his parents, his brother, they're all killed. And so he talks about this idea, and it wasn't in this particular book, it was in something else that he wrote, but he talks about figuring out what you were meant to do within the guardrails of the circumstances around you. So what he wanted to do in his life is he wanted to be a really impactful psychologist. You know, he wanted to make a difference in humanity through his work as a psychologist. And he had started to do that before he was put in the concentration camps. So I don't think there's anybody that would fault him for, you know, giving up on his dreams after spending 3 years in a concentration camp. But he used that time in the concentration camp to continue to evolve his thought process and continue to learn from that and still work toward that vision that he had of being a life-changing, humanity-changing psychologist, which is just crazy to even think about. And as a result, he came up with a whole new school of thought around human behavior. You can see over 9 million copies sold of his book. And he really has changed the world. And he easily could have given that up. So he talks about like figuring out what you're meant to do. That's what your 10-year vision should be based on. And then you're going to have all kinds of circumstances that happen around you over the next 10 years, but it's a guide to get you toward that thing that you want. All right, so that was the first concept. I know it was a real light concept. Let me just check in and make sure that people are still with me, because there is some stuff that's kind of heavy, maybe some things that are hard to follow. So if you're still listening, just say yes or something in the chat so I know that I'm not talking to myself here. Awesome, thank you, Jen. So this next concept we're going to go through is the difference between a yes and a no. So now that we have the basis of where all our decisions should stem from, your 10-year vision, I see a bunch of yeses here. That's awesome. Thanks. Let's talk about the decisions in practice and the repercussions of what can seem like an innocuous decision sometimes. You know, a simple yes or no, it seems innocuous, but let's talk about the real repercussions of how it works. So I was just listening to another interview that I'll send you the link to, but Ryan Holiday was interviewing James Clear. So James Clear several years ago wrote Atomic Habits. Some of you probably have read this book. It's I believe it's a great book, but in full transparency, I haven't read the book yet. I just listened to the interview that he did where he talks about some of the concepts, and I'm planning to read this book. But it was a great interview that I'll send you the link to. And he was talking about this concept of yes. He said, no is a decision and yes is a commitment. So he said, this is basically, and I drew this diagram. He didn't have a diagram when I was listening to it, but I kind of drew a visual of what he was referring to. So he said, all the time we're faced with these decisions, right? Every second of every day, even if it's subconscious, you're making decisions. You might say, well, to wake up and go to work, that's not really a decision. You know, I have to do that. Well, you made a decision a long time ago to be in that job. You made a decision about what time to wake up, what to eat for breakfast, what time to show up to work, how to get to work. There's a lot of decisions you're making, even if you think you're on autopilot and not making these decisions. So, so there's so it's really important to understand the difference here between a yes and a no. And again, he says no is a decision, yes is a commitment. So let's look at what happens when we make these decisions. So every second of every day, this is what's going on. You might get asked, or you might start thinking through these options that you have. And so let's use an example. You might get asked to have coffee with someone, just spend an hour with me, sit down and have coffee. And a lot of people think that a no or a yes holds the same weight. But if you look at what happens when you say no, you're really saying no to one outcome, to that coffee. You're not going to have coffee with that person. Now, what does that do? That opens up that hour, that time slot, to thousands, a million other options, right? You can now do anything else in the world with that time. But if you think about what's the opposite of that, if we say yes to that coffee, that hour, then you've just closed off a million. I don't know how many other options could we think of? We could probably sit here for the rest of our lives coming up with other options that we could do with that hour. So a no and a yes is not the same thing. A no is really equal to 1,000 yeses. Or I'm sorry, a yes is equal to 1,000 no's. And it's interesting when you start to think about that, because now all of a sudden your mind starts shifting around, maybe it's not so innocuous. Maybe I should start to think about my decision-making a little bit deeper before I just answer and say, it's just an hour of my time, not to say that getting coffee with someone is a bad thing to do, but just my example. So there's this book that Greg McCune is how you say his last name, wrote. And I've read this book. I reference it all the time. I've read this book many, many times over the years. And it's called Essentialism. And the subtitle is The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. And what essentialists actually do is you would think this is counterintuitive, that essentialists, if they're pursuing less, then they're going to pursue less options. But it's the inverse. They actually pursue a lot more options. They want to see all the options on the table before they make a decision, because once they make a decision that yes, they're going to go deep on that yes. And so they want to make sure that they're picking the right yeses to say yes to. So they actually explore a lot more options. Essentialism is about less, but it's about better. So you pick less things to do. You don't try to do everything. You pick less, but you do it much better than others. And this all boils down to better decision-making, knowing what to say no to because you're clear on your yeses. So I've seen this to be true as an example within real estate. There's a lot of people on here who are real estate investors. And once you get clear on the path within real estate investing that you want to pursue, it's crazy how it opens up so many more better options for you because you're no longer chasing every deal. People will send me still deals that are 80 unit or 100 unit multifamily properties. And not that there's anything wrong with those, but I won't even look at them. I just delete it right now. And what I used to do years ago is I would spend the next week pursuing that deal, looking at it, analyzing it, thinking, what if this is the deal of the century? I can't pass this by. This just landed in my inbox. It must have some potential. And so I'd chase this deal down. I'd visit the property. I'd start talking to lenders. I'd do all these actions. And then a week later, I'd walk away from the property and think, was that the best use of my time? Could I have pursued the thing that I'm really good at? Because I'm not an expert in multifamily. So am I really going to beat out an expert in multifamily where they have chosen that that's the one thing they're doing and they have a really good system around it? And so once you start chasing all these things, you realize that you're spread a mile wide and an inch deep and you're not making any progress. So once you get clear on the path, and for me now it's vacation rentals, it's all I do. I don't do anything else. And so if you send me something else, I won't even look at it because I'm not going to spend the time on it because I know I'm good at vacation rentals and I can go deep on vacation rentals and understand vacation rentals. And that's where I'm going to make the most traction. So in the beginning, the strides you'll make with essentialism are going to be pretty big, right? Because if you haven't lived an essentialist type of life before, you're probably, wading through a lot of bad options and pursuing a lot of bad options. So once you have a mindset shift around essentialism, you're going to realize I need to eliminate some of these bad things, these things that aren't, supporting my lifestyle. Maybe it's, drinking too much, or maybe it's poor lifestyle choices, or maybe it's the wrong type of investments. Whatever it is, you're going to make some pretty big strides in the beginning, but the more traction you make and success you have, typically the more options you're going to have as well. So then the logical question comes up, what if there's too many great options for you to pursue? So Greg McKeown just wrote this second book that came out this year, which is another one that I love. And I think I'm just like a fanboy to Greg McKeown, but I just love how he illustrates these points and really helps your mindset to shift. So this is a book that I ask everyone who I work with personally to read before we start working together, because it's really just the exact right mindset that I think you need to have. And so what he describes in this book is how to make the things that matter easier. So when you have a whole bunch of options, how do you decide between a lot of great options? And recognizing that options are not binary. So it's not always just a yes or no. So if we look back again at this chart on the left-hand side, and we start thinking through, okay, you got all these options. If each one of these options is the how much effort it's going to take to get to that outcome, instead, maybe it's better to just think about the outcome that you want instead of thinking about the options and how you're going to get there. Think about the outcome and think, is there a better way? So if the thickness of each line is how much effort it's going to take, maybe there's a third option. Maybe it's just not yes or no to what the option that you're thinking about. Maybe you can still get to that outcome, and maybe you can do it in an easier way. And he said, maybe if you do it in an easier way, maybe eventually it turns into an effortless way. And he said, that's the goal of how to get stuff done, is over time, you make things easier until eventually they become effortless. So to stop thinking about your decisions as binary yes or no's, but there might be an option C, which is an easier way to still get to the outcome. And he uses, there's tons of examples. I see Mallory said that, or no, Carol said she loves the summaries in the book because he goes through a whole bunch of examples. Mallory's reading it right now. Boyan said he loves this book. It's a great one. So if you haven't read this book, it's another great one for the list. I kind of already described this, but this is an example of what I'm talking about. So about several years ago, I thought I had been doing long-term single-family home rentals for a couple of years. And I thought the logical next step is to get into multifamily, right? I mean, that's what everyone says. You got to scale. That's where the success is. Everyone graduates to multifamily. And so I thought that's what I got to do. So for about a year, that's where my focus is on multifamily. We bought this property on the left-hand side down in Indianapolis and rehabbed the whole thing. My dad made more trips down there than he'd like to recount, I'm sure. And so we got it all stabilized. It turned out to be a good deal. But in doing that, in that process, I started to think through, again, back to my vision, back to my 10-year vision. And I started to ask myself, why is it that I'm getting into multifamily? Because I don't particularly enjoy this process of scale. And so I thought about it and I said, well, why do I want to scale? Well, it's for financial freedom. That's how you get to financial freedom. And I said, well, what is financial freedom to me? And I started to ask myself, okay, once I defined what financial freedom is to me, then I asked, well, why do I want financial freedom in the first place? And it might seem silly to even ask that, but it's really for lifestyle. It's not about financial freedom. It's about lifestyle and autonomy, and autonomy is just owning your own time. That's what I think I would venture to say most people on this call are probably after, is financial freedom, which equates to owning your own time. And so then I asked, is there an easier way to get to financial freedom, or my version of financial freedom? And what's the quickest path to get there? And so it wasn't multifamily. Not that there's anything wrong with multifamily. I think a lot of people can get there fairly quickly that way. But to me, it was vacation rentals. I realized that was the fastest way for me to get there. And it was something that I really enjoyed as well. So we're going to go through the second exercise right now that kind of relates to everything that we're talking about. And you've really got to do that 10-year ideal vision of your life first, because this builds on it. So I'm going to open up, I'm going to actually share in the chat a link That is not the link that I wanted. That's the link to this webinar. Let me close this out real quick. All right, I'll copy the link here. This is a link to a Google Doc. And so you can click on that and open it. And I'll also send out the link afterwards too. So you don't have to, if you're not somewhere where you can copy this, you don't have to worry about it. And I'll reshare my screen here as well, so you can see what I'm referencing. All right, so this is it. That's the link to it. And this is a framework that I'm sharing. There's 3 tabs on it. And basically you're going to take your 10-year vision and you're going to transfer the first steps of that 10-year vision. What do you need to do first this year in 2022 into this framework? And it's not just a framework where you write down one thing. There's several components. So the first page will describe, the steps involved of what to do. So if you're looking at this later and you don't remember what to do, there's the instructions there. But let me just go to the second tab here. Is a blank template that you can use to fill in your own. And then the third tab is some examples that I provided. So it'll just help you get your mind going around some potential examples. So let me just break it down what this is. So there's 10 categories, and these are not the categories you have to use by any means. These are just 10 of probably the most common. Don't see the link in the chat. Does anyone else see the link in the chat? I'll share it one more time. Hosts and panel. Oh, okay. I'm sending it to hosts and panelists, not participants. Everyone. There we go. All right. There. Now you got the link. Awesome. So you don't have to use these 10 topics. These are just the most common ones. Yeah, I see a lot of people jumping on now. And just to so you can click on file because it's going to be a view only option. So if you want your own version of this, just click on file at the top and click on make copy right here. So it's file, make copy, and then you'll have your own version to use because you're not going to be able to edit the master copy here. It's a view only. So like I said, so pick topics that you want to improve in 2022. So you don't have to use all 10. If you want to use 2, sometimes less is more. It's sometimes the size of this task is what's overwhelming to people, and so they don't do anything. So I think you're going to get much better traction if you just pick the top 2 and fill those in with some of your goals, than to try to do 10 and because there's 10, you don't do any. So it's totally up to you. You can substitute other ones that areas of your life that you want to improve. But there's 3 different categories, and all this is a giant alignment exercise. There's somebody who I was listening to once, and I can't remember who it was now, but they said, your audio needs to match, your video needs to match your audio. So if you think about that, your video needs to match your audio. So when you walk around talking and telling people what you're doing and talking, a lot of people can talk a big game, but does your video match the audio, that you're talking? Do your actions back it up? And so that's what this is. This is just a big alignment exercise, because that's really the root of self-confidence, is doing what you say you're going to do. So there's 3 components. There's the do component, the be component, and the have component. And what I've seen, the reason why New Year's resolutions don't stick is because most people will select one of these and they write it down, and that's their goal. So people will say, they don't even know they're picking the do category, but they pick, I'm going to work out every day, or I'm going to go to the gym every day. And so they say, that's my action that I'm going to do. And at the end of the year, you can be just as obese having gone to the gym every year. Just going to the gym isn't really going to change you. So that's the action. But I would suggest you start with the have column. So if that was your goal, to go to the gym every day, well, what do you want as a result of that? Like, why would you take the time to go to the gym every day? What's the outcome that you're going to gain as a result of going to the gym? So start with that. What's the outcome that you want? What do you want to have as a result? So maybe it's, I want to drop 30 pounds. Okay, great. Now you know what you want as a result. You can work towards something. And maybe that's the first step on your 10-year vision of being a marathon runner. Maybe you're obese right now and you want to be a marathon runner. So the first step this year, I need to drop 30 pounds. So that's your have. Now, then you go to the B. So I work backwards and I say, okay, if I want to drop 30 pounds, what's the identity that I need? Because I've always thought of myself as somebody who's obese. So that's my identity right now. And obese people, don't go to the gym. I don't think that that's the identity of somebody that goes to the gym. So I need to decide on a new identity. So who do I need to be if I'm going to have 30 less pounds at the end of the year? So maybe I need to be somebody who enjoys going to the gym, somebody who enjoys exercise, somebody who enjoys movement. Maybe I need to be somebody who is a health freak. That's my new identity. You can come up with all kinds of different identities. So pick what your new identity is that matches the outcome that you want, and then pick the do's. So you can still pick, I'm going to go to the gym every day if that's what you want to do. But now you're not just showing up at the gym. You're showing up at the gym with a new identity. And you're showing up at the gym with an outcome in your mind of what you want to have as a result of going to the gym. And whatever you write in here, you don't have to write out a 20-page detailed plan of the do, because these things are going to set in motion other actions that will occur, sub actions that occur as a result of going to the gym. So you're going to show up to the gym every day because that's what you set as your goal, your do goal, and you have in your mind what the result you want. So once you're at the gym, you're probably going to get on machines. You're going to start, exercising. You're going to get on the treadmill, do different things that are sub actions. You don't have to say every single thing, but set the things that are like your non-negotiables right here. So hopefully that's helpful. Again, you don't need to fill this in right now. We're going to talk about how to get this filled in at the end. So let me go back to the slides here. All right. So finally, there's some concepts that I think are really going to support what we're doing here. So there's things that I want you to be aware of that are going to stop you from doing this, because I hate to think about it, but I think the majority of people aren't going to do this. And there were years that I knew I needed to do this. I've studied self-improvement and development. It's been something that I've really been interested in for a long time. And it wasn't until 2016 that I actually took the actions and started putting pen to paper. And that's when things really started shifting in my life. So one big thing that's going to hold you back is you're going to sit down and do this and you're going to think, man, I'm doing this wrong. This is a stupid goal. There's no perfect way to do it. So just start filling it in, because I guarantee you, this time next year, you're going to look back at whatever you filled in and be so happy that you filled something in, no matter how stupid you think it is when you're filling it in. So just fill it in. That's where the magic happens. It's not the process or what it looks like as you're doing it. And then the other thing is, you think you have to understand the how. Well, I don't know how to get to that goal right now, so I better not put that as one of my goals right now. There's been a lot of things that I didn't know how it was going to happen. And I put it down and things started to work themselves out. It's not always, but you get much closer than if you weren't doing this action. So these are the two big things. And then you really have to be accepting of the change required. So in this practice or exercise, you're going to be deciding on a new identity, which is tough in some cases. Maybe it's not a new identity, but in a lot of cases, you're going to have to take on a new identity to get the things that somebody with that identity has. And so often you're going to have to give up good to get great. So I want you to think, as you're going through this, what is it that I'm holding on to so tight that it's taking the space of something that could be so much better, but I'm holding on to this thing that it's okay. Maybe it's a 9-to-5 job. Yeah, it's all right. It pays the bills, but I know what I really was born to do is XYZ, whatever that is. Or maybe it's a relationship, whatever it is. It's not necessarily going to be easy. It's simple, but it's not easy, right? So you got to think through, what is the good that I have to give up to get great? So an example of this for me was last year, I was making 150 grand in my W-2 role as a CFO of a large nonprofit. That was my annual pay. And so I'd been there for almost 4 years. We had grown this organization leaps and bounds substantially to a national organization. And many would say that that's pretty good money. You'd be crazy to leave a job that you're making, well into the six figures there. But it was through this exercise and through developing a plan over several years that I recognized what I wanted to accomplish in this role as the CFO there. And it wasn't, I enjoyed the role. It wasn't like I hated this role and I was like, I just can't wait to leave my job. I truly enjoyed the role and I was good at it. We had a lot of success, but thinking through where my vision is, I realized that's not my zone of genius. I was good at it, but it wasn't what I was born to do. And so I had to think through what is it that I want to accomplish in this role before I leave? And then also, what do I want to put into place so that I can transition into doing what's in my zone of genius, which is stuff like this, which is, the podcasting that I do, the vacation rentals that I love doing and providing that experience for people. So I realized that at some point, and we got clear about what that was. It was 8 vacation rentals that once we get to, from a financial standpoint, we'd feel comfortable transitioning. The other thing to recognize that might hold you back is that permission is not going to be granted. So I can't tell you how many friends I have that are quote unquote successful and miserable at the same time. I've been around a lot of go-getters over the years, whether it was at school or in the army or in business. And these people, there's a lot of them who, and some of them aren't even miserable. They're just not living a life by design. They're living a life that they fell into based on vanity metrics, based on just not being intentional, based on checking boxes so that their LinkedIn profile lined up perfectly. And they can show that they're in the profession that they went to school for, and doing what others expected of them. So if that's you, I want you to understand before you do this, that, permission is granted. When you sit down to do your be, do, and have, you can put whatever you want on there. You can break the mold. It doesn't matter what you went to school for, what your background is, or, if you didn't go to school at all. That should have no bearing on what you decide your life should be. So this is something I wish I had learned much earlier. I think it's harder for people who are younger to recognize this, and you start to recognize it more later on. I just interviewed Whitney Sewell on the podcast just 2 weeks ago. And it really highlighted this point for me when I was talking to him. So he's somebody who's extremely successful. He went from a completely broke police officer. He said they didn't even know how they're going to pay their bills, to owning over $300 million of real estate in a 4-year period. And when you talk to him, you can tell that he is just totally focused. He understands what he's doing. He understands how to make decisions. He understands where he's heading, what his goals are, he wants his life to look like. He's very driven, and he's clear on his values and his outcomes. And I asked him, I said, what's the differentiator for you? Like, why there's not too many people I talk to who've accumulated $300 million of real estate in a 4-year period. So why is it that you can do this and others can't? And he said, the biggest thing that stands out for him is that every time he was challenged, his comfort zone was challenged, he would do that thing that was challenging him, as long as it lined up, obviously, with the vision for his life that he was after. So he obviously recognized that he wanted to be a large syndicator and own a lot of real estate. And so there was a lot of stages to that really pushed him out of his comfort zone. And he said yes to these things, knowing that it's going to put him in a better position. And maybe it's not going to go as smooth as he'd like, but every time it leveled him up to the next level. So again, going back to the beginning, I shared that I created this YouTube channel 2 years ago, and I knew nothing about YouTube. And I think back to, I just made a commitment. I just posted the first videos. Now there's over 250 videos there. There's over 1,000 subscribers. And, I think back and I'm like, what if I just had thought, well, this is, people are going to make fun of me. Who am I to be somebody who creates a podcast and creates YouTube? And I know there's a lot of people around me that don't understand it. They're like, why are you doing these videos and stuff? Where's that leading? But it was because this vision 10 years from now, I want to have a thriving community that's really helping each other and really improving people's lives. That's part of the vision. And so I had to start with, what is somebody who wants that? What are the things that they do? What's the identity that they have? And now, just 2 weeks ago, I got to sit down with Robert Kiyosaki for an hour, and I interviewed him for the 100th episode that's going to be released in a week. And I got to ask him all kinds of questions. And he's the guy that got me started in real estate 15 years ago. So it was amazing. It kind of to go full circle like that. And I have no illusions that if I had called up his office, he wrote the #1 personal finance book of all time, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So he's a pretty popular guy. And if I called up his office and said, hey, I want to sit down with Robert for an hour and pick his brain, I probably would have got hung up on. But because 2 years ago, I decided I'm going to start this platform that, my wife and my mom are going to be the only ones that listen to the first episodes. That allowed me to sit down with somebody who, is really probably the biggest person in the rental property space. Brendan Bouchard is another great mind that I like to listen to. He's a super motivational guy. And he says this quote, I've heard him say it a couple of times. He says, where randomness rules, mediocrity reigns. So think about that. Where randomness rules, where things in your life are random, mediocrity reigns. And I also heard somebody else say, planning is bringing the future into the present so that we can do something about it. So if you think about it, what areas of your life seem to just happen to you, that it seems like it's just kind of random right now. I think those are the areas that, as you're doing this exercise, that's where you need to focus, because those are probably the mediocre areas. If you think about it, where randomness rules, mediocrity reigns. And so focus on those areas and being more intentional about what you want to happen in those areas. And I think that's where you're really going to see the biggest improvement. So are you ready to get started? I'm going to outline, I've got to outline for the next steps in a couple moments. And that's really, again, where the magic is going to occur. It's doing these actual exercises. And I'm going to go through those in a second, and we'll make space on your calendar to plot out your ideal 2022. But as you're plotting that out, I want to share with you who I work with on a personal basis, because like I mentioned at the beginning, it's a very specific type of person who has a very specific goal. And if it aligns with what you're doing, I think I'm one of the best there is at getting you closer to your goal. If it doesn't, that's great too. So I just want to share what that is. And so when I went through this exercise several years ago, I realized that personally, I needed to focus on highly levered residual work that I can do once and it continues to pay me indefinitely. And I think that's some of the most impactful work you can do, because it frees up space in your life to do so many other things that you're passionate about. So long-term rentals were good for that. Obviously, we know, investing in real estate is a good way. It's a highly levered activity, and it provides residual income over time. But once I looked at short-term rentals and I realized how much more lucrative they can be compared to long-term rentals, and that we could make well over $1,000 in some cases on one single property every month in cash flow, which I couldn't touch with long-term rentals, then I realized that that's where we need to be spending our time. And also I realized that it's something that I really enjoy. So we had a vacation rental, started with one in our basement, and it was something that we enjoy doing. It's cool to create these experiences. So this is a person here that we just rented out our personal residence here, the one I'm standing in, over Christmas break, because we were spending time with family, and we set it at a price that we're like, if you're going to pay us that much per night, well, we're traveling anyway, you can stay here for a week. So Cindy and her family, just an awesome family, stayed in our house. And she wrote this. She said, Taryn, the house is perfect. You're the most gracious hostess. We're extremely comfortable and sad it's time to leave. We will definitely reach out and rent again if we can find time with my family to come back in the summer or fall. You have an awesome place. Chris just let the chickens out. We love meeting you and hope to see you again when we return. Happy New Year and all the best with baby number 3. We left some lamb in the fridge for your husband, a couple of small gifts under the tree for the kids. So our guest, who literally just paid us thousands of dollars to stay in our house for a week, left presents for our kids under our Christmas tree when they checked out, and they left the house spotless. Like so there's a lot of side benefits. It's not just about the money. And so we recognize that. And so once I realized the impact this can have, and once we started accumulating properties, we realized, okay, once we have 8, that pays all of our bills. And so we got to that point plus some. I realized I wanted to help others have the exact same results. And so that's what I do. So I created this program, the First Vacation Rental Investment Blueprint. And it's very specifically for people who are dependent on their day job. And it takes them from someone who has no passive income to finding, buying, and setting up their first high cash flowing vacation rental. So it's all the focus is on getting that first deal done and start getting high cash flow. And the idea is that you can use that first one then as a model going forward, a template, and you can just replicate it as many times as you want to get to financial freedom. That's what my wife and I did. And this program walks people through it step by step, and there's nothing held back. There's no missing steps. So I've kind of poured my heart and soul into creating this program because I wanted to help one very specific type of person. Instead of trying to spread myself and saying, I'm going to work with tons of different people. It's one very specific person who has the goal of getting their first vacation rental. And it's set up into 3 different phases. I thought through it like I think through building a house. So the first steps are the foundation phase, where we get super clear on what we're talking about here, on your goals, and figuring out exactly what you want as a result of all the work you're going to put in, then figuring out what market makes the most sense, then figuring out how to find the property, how to analyze the property. There's tools that are provided with it, how to finance it, and then ultimately how to close on a property, then how to transform it into a great vacation rental, and then how to automate the process of managing that property. Some of the cleaners and guest responses and things that you do once you own vacation rentals. And with it, there's weekly personalized coaching and Q&A sessions with me. So every week we do a session on Monday afternoon right now, where you can jump on, ask any of your questions. We'll go through specific deals that people are getting who are part of the program, lifetime access to all the content and future updates. So anytime something changes, it's an evolving program. There's a private support and accountability group. And then there's a very defined outcome and success measure, which I think is missing from a lot of programs that exist. It's like, I'll give you a whole bunch of information if you'll pay me, and then you're on your own to go take it. And maybe you have success, maybe you don't. There's defined success measure. And that is, did you get your first vacation rental? And if not, I'm here until you do. I'm going to support you until you do. So it walks you through that process step by step. We just started the first version of this program the second week of September, and we had 26 people go through that version. It was sort of a beta version. It was live. Now each module is recorded, so you can go through at your own pace. But 54% of the people who went through that first version of the program either have their first vacation rental under contract, or they've purchased it, or some of them, a couple of people even have it up on Airbnb now, and they're actually making revenue, which is awesome to see. So it's pretty quick. Adam, actually, he's part of the program. I love this picture. I like your hat, Adam. And he just wrote this. You can see it's on December 8th in the group. He said, after following the advice of Kirby on Monday, that was our Q&A call. Today, I have my first scheduled booking, 3 days booked, and I cover 41% of my monthly expenses. This is with the lower prices and 20% discount that I recommended for his first few bookings. I can't wait for the summer. So think about that. 3 days of one of his units, it's a 3 unit that he owns, covers 41% of his entire expenses on the 3 unit. And that's in the off season at a 20% discount. And so in the summer, he's going to at least double his prices, most likely. So you can see this was a property he bought in Racine, turnkey, $340,000, and he's projecting an annual income of $110,000. So you can do the math there. Pretty impressive. Even if he doesn't hit 110, even if he comes anywhere close to that, I think most people would consider that a win. So who is this for? If you're dependent on a W-2, but you want to have financial independence and the ability to work because you want to work, then I'd say this is for you. If one of your goals for 2022 includes getting into vacation rentals or short-term rentals, then this is definitely for you. If you're ready to invest in long-term growth and not looking for a get-rich-quick scheme, this is not something that you're going to make $1 million overnight. I don't know that there's anything out there like that that's safe. But it is in my opinion, that's what I do. It's what's led to financial freedom for my family. And so I think it's one of the best investments out there. Mark and May are another one who they're a couple that are awesome, longtime friends, and they're in the program as well. They're a little bit ahead of the game because Mark is a rehabber. And so he opted to buy this property just prior to getting into the program, and he was starting to rehab it. So some people buy turnkey properties. He bought one that he was going to rehab. And then we kind of walked him through the process of getting it set up, all the furnishings, all that stuff. And then all the tools, like, how to manage the property and automate the responses going forward. And so he said 4 long months of nights and weekends rehabbing this one, but it's finally listed on Airbnb. It was live for less than an hour before we got our first booking. We're pumped, couldn't do it without the support of this group. And he just got his second vacation rental under contract, and they've gotten lots more bookings since this post on December 21st. So it's an awesome log cabin. I know in the summertime, especially, this thing is just going to be off the charts. So those are just a couple examples of people who are in the group. So if this sounds like something you'd be interested, you're invited to hop on a call with me and see if it's a good fit. So I've set aside time on my calendar that you can book. You can get access to my calendar here and set up a 45-minute strategy session with me. It's not me trying to sell you on this. I just want to understand what your goals are. And if your goals align with this program, sometimes it's nice to have someone who's been down the road before you that can help guide your footsteps and get you to that goal just a little bit quicker. So you can go to livingoffrentals.com/call, and that'll just bring up my calendar. And so you can book a call, right there, and we can see if it's a good fit for you. At whatever is convenient for you. So I've opened up the next 2 weeks on my calendar, so you can pick a time that's good for you. And then I want to go over the final action steps for setting up your goals and setting up your 2022. So there's really 3 steps that I implore you to please do. And you can go back and reference this. I'm going to send you the link to this webinar once we're done, and please go back and reference it as you're filling this out. But put a time right now. Do this before we're done with the webinar. Put a time on your calendar, hopefully this week. I mean, if you can do it tomorrow or maybe the 31st before you go and celebrate New Year's, set aside an hour. That's all it takes. I mean, you're going to be so happy you spent that hour at the end of the year and you look back on this. So set aside a time that you will sit down and do this. And you can during that hour, fill out your 10-year vision, just a few paragraphs, and then the goal setting framework, and put it in ink, and you will instantly start making better decisions. I know it seems counterintuitive. And you can also right now put other big priorities on your calendar. I look at these at my goals quarterly. So you can put right now on April 1st, at the end of the first quarter, you can put a time right now on your calendar to review your goals, just so you remember. And you can do that each quarter so that you can just bring this sheet up, because you're going to fill it out this week, and then you can tweak it, you can adjust it, you can just check back in on where you're at, and you're going to be so much better off for doing that. And then if you really want to get results, This has been proven time and time again. Ask someone to partner with you on this process. So tell them, watch the webinar, fill this document out, fill these 2 documents out, create your vision for your life, put your goals for the year, and then let's meet quarterly. Let's sync up our calendars, and we'll sit down together and share what's going right, what we can adjust, bounce ideas off each other, and you will be blown away with the results that you get. So these are the 3 actions that you got to take. Just listening to this webinar is not going to do it for you. There's another book that I recommend. This will be on the resource list, called Traction. And we operated at the nonprofit I was at. We operated on the Traction or EOS process. And it's awesome. It's just a huge accountability system. And so it takes your annual goals, breaks them down into quarterly, they call them rocks. And then there's weekly meetings, and then there's daily KPIs really that you can keep track of. And so it allows you to keep track of this. So I highly recommend that book as well. And that'll help you if you want to take this a step further, but just writing it down is huge. So that's it. Anyone who wants to book, I'm going to open it up to questions, and I will leave this up. Again, if you want to book a call with me, the link is livingoffrentals.com/call. A lot of people who are on this webinar are in that program. So I appreciate you showing up today, and I'm excited for the results I'm starting to see within that program. And if you've booked a call, let me know in the comments, and I will go through if there's any questions on, the program itself, or if there's any questions on this process of goal setting. I'm happy to answer. What was the first book you initially referenced in the EOS book? So EOS book, EOS stands for Entrepreneurial Operating System. And that's the system that's described in the book Traction. So Gino Wickman wrote that book called Traction, and it's great. I've seen him speak a couple of times as well. And so you can check out Traction. He's written a couple other books as well that support it. And then the first book that I referenced was, I'm trying to think, let me look at my slides here. Scrolling back through here. Oh, 15, the 15 commitments of conscious leadership. So Jim Dethmer wrote that, another really great book. I've got it on audio, and I say I've read these books. Really what I mean is I've listened to these books. I've listened to a lot of audiobooks over the last 10 years since audiobooks became a thing and you could listen to them on your phone. I've read probably 5 books in the last 10 years. I'm a very slow reader, but I eat up audiobooks. So I've got tons and tons of audiobooks. And anytime I'm at the gym or driving or whatever, I listen to these audiobooks, and it's where I get a ton of these ideas. I mean, that's where I try to think through, how does this apply to my life? So Xavier asked a question, did you go through the framework individually or with Taryn as a couple? What do you recommend? So I recommend doing this on your own first. I think it's important to come up with your ideal life without having other influence, and have your partner come up with their ideal life. And you can even go through the be, do, and have exercise and set your goals for the year, and then come together. None of this is written in stone. So if you have completely opposite goals and visions of where you're heading, this will be the biggest blessing you've ever had in your entire life. Because I promise you, if you are both rowing in totally opposite directions, it's going to end bad for you. Because all your decisions are made based on where you see yourself 10 years down the road. So you will make totally opposite decisions than she will, and you won't understand why, because you've never discussed your individual visions. So it's going to probably be, more of a difficult conversation. Taryn and I were pretty synced on, our values and what we think are important and where we're heading. So we had some minor adjustments, but if you're going in opposite direction, it's best to address that now and figure out, a compromise or something you can both live with and work toward, so that you know when you're making decisions what the outcome is that you're address or you're going after. So that's my recommendation there. Jen, don't tell Kirby. Yeah, thanks, Jen. So eventually you'll get to it. Put it on your be do have list. I have zero real estate experience, and I have my first short-term rental under contract after the course. Pretty excited. Awesome. That was Matt Coughlin. So I appreciate that, Matt. Yeah, I mean, I know yours is projected to make $1,800 per month of passive income after all your expenses, and that's a pretty significant amount for one property. So it's definitely not unheard of. What else? Let me scroll back through and see if there were any questions that came up throughout. Alexander, it's good to see you, man. Cool. Yeah, a lot of people are in here that I've known from past lives or current lives. So that's great. It's good to see people. Cool. Yeah, I don't see any other questions. So I will go ahead and end it. But yeah, like I said, if you think that working together personally can support your goals, feel free to book a call. And it's no harm if it doesn't work. So I appreciate you spending the time with me tonight, this afternoon. It's been fun. I love talking about this stuff and doing these things. So hopefully it's going to be beneficial to you. And next year, I'm excited to hear any wins that people have as a result. So I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks, Alexander. Thanks, Xavier. See you guys.